Yeah, I just pulled a slide a little bit about me. I'm a second year PhD student doing a biology PhD at Northwestern. This is a kind of picture of me in the lab. This is the microscope and the worms I work with. I study kind of how these worms are able to rebuild their entire bodies. So they can undergo a process of regeneration, which is obviously not available in humans on a large scale. So I find that interesting. And originally I'm from New York. I got my bachelor's in biology at Stony Brook University, and now I moved here to Chicago for Northwestern to do my PhD. Outside the lab, I fence, as you can see in this photo. This is me on the right, pre-COVID times, but now I just do a lot of cooking, eating, and Netflixing. So I'm really excited to be here today. And so is there a chat that
We did have a chat
elegant?
message.
Oh, okay. Can you read them out to me? Because if there is.
It says, are the worms C. elegans?
No. So C. elegans is another model organism that is studied in the lab, but my worms are flatworms called planaria. And they're these cute, very cute worms that if you chop them into tiny little pieces, they will regrow into individual worms and fully functional. So it's really fascinating project and organism. Yeah. Also, feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions along the way. So kind of going back to that, I'm interested in this big branch of biology called stem cell biology and especially regenerative biology. And I'll be going over kind of very briefly a small part of that science. And so focusing on stem cells, what they are, and the therapies that exist today and hopefully in the near future as well. So I know I think a lot of people have heard the word stem cells probably in like pop culture and in the movies, like, oh, look, we're gonna have stem cells to build a new human. And so maybe it's good to go over that. So to bring it back, kind of our bodies are made of billions of cells. And these cells are highly specialized mostly. So we have many different types of cells. You know, you have your brain cells, also known as neurons. You have liver cells, muscle cells, and red blood cells. And each of these cells have a distinct function. Each type of cell has different abilities and what they can do. For example, the red blood cells in your blood carry oxygen to all your organs, which is vital to keeping us alive. As compared to the brain cells or the neurons, they send electrical signals that allow us to, move, talk, perceive our environment. And so these cells have highly specialized functions and they're very critical to keeping us alive and moving. So what's really interesting is like, how are these cells made? That's a question I'm really interested in. And how these cells made are from stem cells. So we bring you back all the way at the beginning of life. And that's like at the embryo stage or an egg, right? And so that's when the sperm and the egg kind of combine together. That's kind of the beginning of life. And that is actually the ultimate stem cell because that egg ultimately divides and grows and becomes your entire body. And so that is kind of what we think of the ultimate stem cell. So a lot of kind of stem cell biology is kind of studying this process of development over time, as well as stem cells within our own body, which I'll talk about later. So to give you a more concrete definition of what a stem cell is, stem cells are actually just cells that can have the ability to become one or more types of cells. For example, a cell that can make, either a liver cell or intestinal cell, that would be considered a stem cell. There are some other properties, including the ability to replicate themselves and maintain this ability to become other types of cells. Other behaviors, including persisting for a long time, although long time is kind of relative in the body, right? And it's dependent on the type of organ we're talking about. And most of the time, a stem cell's behavior is regulated by other cells in its environment, or that's called a niche. Okay. But not all stem cells are the same. So I talked to you about I just mentioned, the egg is the ultimate stem cell, but as we develop and as we grow into, from in utero, in the uterus, from that egg to that fully formed baby body, and even into adulthood, cells are not the same. because they become different. So we have a terminology and a way of speaking about what these stem cells can become, and we call it potency. And it just means that it has different levels of potential. So a lot of things in biology, you can actually break down the words by prefixes and suffixes. And so I kind of highlighted it here. If we say a stem cell is totipotent, like it is in the egg, toti means total, potency meaning having potential. And so if you combine that together, it means complete potential. And in this case, we're talking about the complete potential to make a body. Okay, additionally, there is another layer of potency or potential, namely pluri and multipotent, both meaning more than one. And that in this case refers to the potential to make more than one type of cell. And then on the lower end of the potencies, we have unipotent, meaning that they have the potential to make one cell type. And in the end, when they become the terminally differentiated cells, or the very specialized cells in your body, for example, the red blood cells, the neuron, or your heart cells, we call that cell to have no potency because it cannot become other types of cells, but only become itself. And those are terminally differentiated cells. And so I hope through these diagrams you can see the layers of complexity of how we talk about stem cells and how different stem cells have kind of different abilities to become different types of cells. And actually, one really famous analogy of how we look at potency is this kind of slope diagram called Waddington's landscape. And so you imagine this is like a mountain. This is the mountain, right? And at the start of the mountain, you're all high on altitude. And in this case, we're kind of looking at the cell as the totipotent stem cell as the highest altitude. And as you roll down that hill, imagine a marble going down a hill with valleys and crooks and nook and crannies. You kind of start losing altitude and losing the ability to kind of go in different paths. You're only starting to be restricted into that type of path. And that's kind of how we imagine potency works in stem cells. You have this stem cell that has the ability to become any of these types of stem cells. But as you start to slowly differentiate, you lose the potential. If you go down the hill, you lose the potential to become all these other types of stem cells, other types of cells. And that's how we lose potency. So you can also make this like analogy to skiing, where you're going down the mountain, you're standing on top of the mountain. There are so many trails you can take. And then as you go down the mountain, maybe halfway down the mountain, there's only so many trails you can take there. You can't go on the ones on the right if you went onto the left. So it's kind of that similar type of analogy. Okay, so a lot of stem cell biology is focused on understanding development because we come from that, totipotent stem cell. But actually, you do retain some stem cells in your adult body after kind of being born. So we call these adult stem cells. And you have a lot of them in your body in small populations. So for example, your hair has a bunch of stem cells, and that's why your hair keeps growing as you age. Your liver also has stem cells that kind of replicate itself and help maintain the organ after you have injury to it, such as, drinking alcohol, which actually does kill your liver a little. Your intestines also has stem cells, and these stem cells are very, very active. And actually your intestines is like fully replaced by these stem cells over every 3 or 4 days. Your skin as well, as most of you know, your skin sheds constantly and maintains the barrier from the outside and your inside. And so those are also maintained by stem cells. Your muscles and your bones also house stem cells. And I'll talk more about the bone stem cells later because you've probably heard of the therapy that is commonly used with those. So these adult stem cells kind of live in your body throughout adulthood, but they generally have lower potency as compared to when you're an egg and developing from a baby. And mostly they're really important to act to maintain your organs during life. And as I mentioned, such as your liver during injury, they're really vital to kind of repair your body back to normal function. So I want to talk to you about the bone stem cells. And I'm sure most of you have heard of this therapy called bone marrow transplants. And that's where you take, a patient, in this case, such as radiation, has undergone cancer radiation, and usually that depletes or kind of injures the bone stem cells. And so what you can do as therapeutic that's existed for many years now, you can take a donor's bone marrow and transplant it into the host that needs that transplant. And this would allow for healthier bone marrow cells and to replenish the cells that are depleted from the recipient. And so why this works is because there are stem cells known as hematopoietic stem cells that reside in your bone. And so in your bone marrow, as you can see in this image, these stem cells can become many different types of stem cells. So hematopoietic stem cells are considered to be pluri or multipotent stem cells. So they become the red blood cells in your blood, which again carry oxygen to all your organs. They become white blood cells, which are very crucial to the immune system, that fight off, foreign bacteria or viruses that invade your body. And then they can also become platelet cells, which are very important for clotting your blood and preventing you from bleeding out once you get injured. And so by using the bone marrow transplant therapies, doctors have been able to kind of replace unhealthy bone marrow in patients. And so it's been a really cool therapy. There's a chat question. Yes, these are, okay, so the question is, aren't these unique to an individual? And that is a really good question. And that is actually one of the major cons of this treatment. You have to have a bone marrow, a patient match. So the doctor kind of goes through a lot of patient lists and tries to find someone that is genetically similar to the patient that is being donated, because there can be, immune rejection. And so another major con of bone marrow transplants is that you're likely to be on lifelong anti-rejection medication. I'm not really in the medical side of things, so I don't know how often that is or when it's being used, but that is definitely one of the downsides of this treatment. Yeah, great. Okay, so talking about the downsides of this treatment, right? You kind of have this problem with genetic matching with patients, but there is a new and emerging technology that I want to talk about that kind of gives us hope in this new personalized medicine field, if you've heard about it, that would that will likely alleviate the problem of immune rejection. And this is a kind of discovery called induced pluripotent stem cells. So to bring you back, right, in normal development, you have this stem cell. Again, imagine rolling down the hill, and it loses potency over time as it becomes the different cells of your body. Now, this amazing discovery in 2007 showed that you can actually reverse this by taking adult stem cells, inducing a couple of genes, special genes, and it actually can reverse back to a stem cell-like state. And that was a really remarkable find. I mean, the discovery was made in 2007 and the Nobel Prize was given in 2012. So you can see how revolutionary this idea is and how much it changed, how biology and medicine. And so, yeah, and so these cells are called induced pluripotent stem cells because, they're originally potentially your red blood cells, and suddenly you can make them back into stem cells. And so how this can be changed for the future of medicine is that now you can take a patient's stem cell, you can take a patient's own cells, you can collect them, you can make them into induced pluripotent stem cells. So now they're the patient's own stem cells. And with the advent and kind of discovery of new gene editing techniques, we can even potentially correct the mistakes or the genes that are causing the disease in these cells, and then transplant them back into the patient. And so this would actually bypass all those immune rejection problems that we have, because you're taking a patient's own cells and putting them back into themselves, but corrected. And while this has not, our science has not gone to the point where it is good enough for therapeutics, I really do see that this will become a standard in medicine in the near future. And so that is a really good hope for cell therapy and stem cell therapeutics. Yeah. And on the other side of this, not only can you help cure yourself, and maybe sometimes it's not genetic, what you can do is that you can take this patient's cells and then turn them into these pluripotent stem cells and actually use them to model the disease that is occurring. For example, if they don't know what exact genes are causing this disease, they can just use it to screen different drugs they could potentially use for therapeutics in a petri dish. And that would allow for more personalized medicine. So it's not one treatment or one size fits all. And so both of these are very amazing kind of feats for medicine. And if we do manage to get it, very precise, then it will revolutionize the way we do medicine. And so I talked about some of the kind of broad strokes of what iPSCs can do, for cell therapy applications, disease modeling. We can do drug development and discovery, and hopefully eventually the goal is to have personalized medicine. And of course, we could also do toxicology testing with it. So while this is all, beautiful and a lot of hope, it is also, prey to scams, unfortunately. And I figured that, it's such a huge buzzword in the pop culture. I thought I'd spend a couple of minutes talking about these scams and how to, not be a target of them. But just a quick search into Google, you can find many, many headlines of people getting scammed out of therapies and putting in so much money. And so some of the dangers I want to talk about is of unproven stem cell treatments. For example, like bone marrow transplant does not fall into that category because it is widely used in medicine and widely, studied and approved by doctors. So some dangers of unproven stem cell treatments include large monetary investment, which is mostly what they're after anyway. At best, if you do get a therapy that is a scam, at best, it doesn't work and doesn't cure what you want it to cure. At one of the worst ends of things, it could also interfere with your normal bodily function. For example, if you have a disease, it actually might make it worse at worst. And even worse than that, I guess, these cells can cause tumors and cause cancer to form because stem cells have this extreme ability, not extreme, but bigger ability to become different cell types. They can proliferate rapidly, divide rapidly, and form tumors, which is kind of what they kind of are, cancer kind of is. So can actually cause more harm. Yeah, and even now, when I kind of looked this up, it was published in June of 2020 over here in USA Today. There's a stem cell company potentially testing, a medicine for COVID using stem cells. And while, we all know currently there's no cure or treatment for COVID, except for the vaccine that we have now. So this is kind of, we're not entirely sure if it's working. So, but still, scientists will try. But if it is real, we have yet to see. I see we have another question. How do the people offering these get them, and how do they make them? And I'm assuming you're asking about how they make stem cells. Stem cells can be found in many variety of sources. In the laboratory, when we use mice, usually to study mammals, we take them from the mammalian embryo. For humans, that is not allowed. It's unethical. We cannot use fetal stem cells in such a way, I believe. So if you're using human cells, they're likely to use the induced pluripotent stem cell method, where they take, like skin cells and then turn them back into stem cells. I don't know exactly for this company what they're doing, but to me, it doesn't sound like it's going to work anyway. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. Okay, so I guess, I'm not a doctor, but there are some things that you can do to avoid stem cell scams. And I did also kind of look through the FDA's official site on stem cells, stem cell therapies. And actually, the Food and Drug Administration does oversee stem cell therapies and does approve of them. And so if you are faced with the decision whether to go do a stem cell therapy before treatment, and that's critical that it's before treatment, ask if this treatment is FDA approved. And what another thing you can do to make sure they're not, just lying to you, that it's saying that it is FDA approved, you can actually ask for the new drug application number and look it up online. And I do believe most of the approved therapies are online and available for the public to see. And as all therapies and kind of medicines, ask questions about everything you're unsure about. It is going into your body, you should know what is going into your body and if it will actually help. And if the therapy, outweighs, if the benefits outweigh the risk. Another thing you can do, of course, is to ask a trusted physician for their advice. And also have a second opinion by another knowledgeable and, of course, trusted physician. Another thing to be aware of is that, they are companies selling you therapeutics after all. And so patient testimonials and other marketing might be misleading. I am not sure how to get around that, but a lot of ways that you could is to read medical literature or primary, science journals, although not I don't, they are rather difficult to read, even for a scientist such as myself. So just do as much research as you possibly can. I think I have another question. Okay. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Emily. Yeah, so hopefully through this kind of short presentation, I gave you kind of a glance of what stem cells could do. It's a whole field and it defines like people's careers just to study one specific type of stem cell. So it is a lot to talk about, but I hopefully showed you that it has unlimited potential, much like the cells themselves, for research tools, for therapies, for drugs, and for personalized medicine in the future, hopefully as well. So thank you for listening, and I'm open to any questions that you have. Yeah.
Any questions for Katherine? I have one, Katherine. Yeah. When you talked about and maybe this is a question related to like the scams and stuff, like what are some of the immediate diseases and stuff that this is trying to be used for, that people are marketing it for?
Yeah, so actually recently there was a huge scandal out of Harvard Medicine with a Dr. Anversa, who claimed that there were adult cardiac stem cells in the heart. And he published and built a career basically on on this false claim that there are stem cells in the heart that divide after a heart attack, and that they could potentially be tapped in for regenerative medicine in the future. And actually, it was very disheartening because I think his studies went all the way to like a phase 1 clinical trial, and then he was found out. All his studies were redacted, but there was still a lot of money and a lot of funding, research funding that was spent. And unfortunately, these things do happen. Some scientists and doctors unfortunately use their degree for fame or for money. So you do have to be kind of cognizant and kind of aware, but overall the medical establishment is trustworthy. Overall, there are some bad actors, as there are in many fields. For actual like therapeutics, I know recently, I think they use this type of thing to cure sickle cell anemia, I believe, where they combined bone marrow and gene editing technologies and iPSCs and transplanted them back into a young boy, I believe. I am not entirely sure if that is exactly how they did it, but I do believe they used it in sickle cell anemia.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions before we turn it over to Sarah?
All right. Thank you.
All right. Great job, Katherine. Now we'll turn it over to Sarah.
Sorry, I'm okay.
No worries.